Well, it looks like we finally got that Star Wars Winnie the Pooh crossover we've all been wanting. Nah, just kidding. But that would be awesome, to a degree. Welcome back to Mr. J's Movie Reviews, or should I say Mr. J's Humble Opinion Movie Reviews. And today we're checking out Christopher Robin. Yeah, that Christopher Robin, as in Winnie the Pooh. And honestly, as a fan of both the original story, thanks to archived footage, and the 90s program, I went into this with pretty high expectations. I was not disappointed, thankfully. It was a little over an hour and a half long, and that was a near perfect amount of time to tell a coherent story. Basically, the Christopher Robin we grew up with has indeed grown up. He survived stuff. I don't want to spoil it, but he survived stuff. And now he's a family man. But in the same vein as Hook, he's losing both himself and his perspective. Basically, he's losing what made him him, not to mention his perspective. You know, what he should value in life. And he's got a lot on his plate because of what his boss is putting him through. And in order to help him, the Fates saw fit to bring back that silly old honey-obsessed bear from his childhood. And eventually, all his old friends. Now, I don't want to get too far into it, so I'll just say this. Ewan McGregor as Christopher Robin did very well. He encapsulated a person who is still themselves on the inside. They're just buried under a mountain of adulthood. And as an adult who still remembers how kind of valuable a childhood is, I can really relate, despite the fact that I don't yet have kids. As for Haley Atwell as his wife, she did okay. She played a British housewife, basically. But she wasn't squeaky clean, she was normal, relatable. She might have been playing a British person, and she is in fact British, but she felt like someone I lived across the street from. As for the rest of the human characters, they did well. They added to the story in various degrees. I liked Chris's daughter a lot. Well, I don't want to get into it without spoiling things, but let's just say she does what a lot of kids would do in her shoes. And while she did at times feel like I'd grown up in a kid's body, a grown up in a kid's body, she still felt like a kid. But a British kid, so there's that. And surprisingly, some of the characters really added to the classic veins of storytelling. But I don't want to say how, because I don't want to spoil it. As for the denizens of the 100-Acre Wood, Pooh, Tigger, Kangaroo, Piglet, and Eeyore are all meant to be represented by stuffed animals. That's what they always were in the stories. Living stuffed animals. And in this version, they really do look like stuffed animals. And Rabbit and Owl, and possibly Gopher, all look like real forest animals. But when they all started speaking, I started to believe they were my childhood characters. Especially Pooh and Tigger. Both phenomenally voiced by Jim Cummings. When they started speaking, I believed, period. And as all the characters went through the story, it really brought me back to a fairly high point in my life. Also, it kind of hit me in sort of a few emotionally raw spots, but in a good way. Needless to say, I got choked up solely from the imagery, and later from some of the dialogue, but I'll get into that later. The effects were really good. I believed that these stuffed animals and forest creatures were standing there talking to the characters. And there's this one sequence that does look a little CG-ish, but it's sort of meant to look that way, sort of meant to look surreal. Because for the most part, it's done totally live. In the woods, in London, in the English countryside, it all looked real, it all felt real. And, slight spoiler, it takes place shortly after the World Wars. So, that time period really looked believable. Now, as for the impact of the plot, like I said, it hit me right in the feels, touched on a few emotional raw points, and it did get an emotional response from me, which is kind of rare. But like I said, it was in a good way. Honestly, modern fans of Winnie the Pooh might not feel the same way, but if you're a fan from way back when, this is definitely worth seeing. Especially if you want to introduce your kids to the Pooh Bear you grew up with. I highly recommend it. This is Mr. J signing out and reminding everyone not to get rid of childish things, but to save them for the next generation. Because even the old-fashioned stuff has a lesson to teach. Take care.